Alright, let's begin. Welcome to part 2 of my final. Here we are showing the pre-made models a bit better because I didn't really use all of them in my original final project. So we have the lighting demo from week 6, but duplicated to show everything. So we got our cubes over here just to showcase it bouncing off all the lighting. And then all of the two spheres over here with some repeated textures on the sphere itself. And then over here we have our triangles, our pyramids. So for the pyramid, so for this assignment itself, it was fairly straightforward. I just copied week 6 with some slight alterations. For starters, with what we didn't have in week 6 was I did some graphic objects for each of them. So for the graphic objects, that's how we set it up. And yeah, so those are I ended up doing one of every single pre-made model just to get it across that they all work with lighting, and the ones that have texture on them work with texture as well. And because I didn't really discuss it earlier, let me go to the graphic objects. So we got color light, color, text light, texture. So for our texture, it's fairly straightforward. It gets how much meshes. For the pre-made models, this is always 1, so the meshes don't matter as much. But for my final scene, there were obviously different numbers to account for the different mesh numbers. So in here, it condenses all the code in the draw scene so that instead of setting every individual aspect to the shader constantly, we can instead put them into a graphic object so that when we render the graphic object, it puts everything in here. So instead of having 15 lines for each individual mesh and setting it to context, setting the role of resource sampler and rendering, we can just say render and it puts everything in here in a convenient fashion. So for the texture, what we would store here is it's the model itself, the mesh as well as its world, and the shader we want to render it with. So because it's texture, this one's going to be using a texture shader. So, wow, shocking. And then we have functions to set the world and set the textures. Because we're working with meshes, we need 2 different set textures. We want one that will set all textures to be the same exact thing, and one that will do specific numbers. This is both for ease of access and also a bit helpful to make sure that we don't forget to set a texture. If we have, say, for my scene, a golem that only has a body texture of stone as well as the color of eyes, I can set the texture to be eyes, the stone for everything, and then I can go back and set the eye texture to be specifically for the eyes. For the text light trio, it's similar to what we did before for the texture, but now instead we have a mesh materials array, we have an array of materials, so that way it can handle lighting now. So for the texture, if we were trying to render this with a lighting, it would not work because it doesn't have a way to react to lighting. This is just another way to condense our code so that way when we run it, we can send the material as well and then the resource sampler. So instead of having all of this done in the draw scene, we can condense it to just the rendering. And then text light, color, and color light are pretty much what those two, well, maybe not, color light's a bit different, but text light is the same thing as trio, but text light, it doesn't account for multi-light, which I don't know if that's actually kind of, now I'm thinking about it, I don't know if that's important because, well, yeah, it is important because shader text, because it's a different shader. So this will handle any single light textures, while this will handle multi-light texture. In my case, whatever I set shader text trio to be. For color and color light, they, instead of having textures, they have a color, and like the others, we can either set them individually, or set them all to be the same thing. Same thing over here for the color light. Either set all the meshes to be the same thing, or set individual meshes. And that is the light demo. So just run it one more time. So we got this. And I adjusted the spotlights so that they don't bleed into each adjacent scene.